Hello, welcome to my channel. My name's Amanda. We're going to talk about ayahuasca. So I actually hesitated a little bit before making this video because I thought, who am I? There are so many people who are way more experienced than me with this medicine. And then I caught myself because I believe that if we have something to share, we have something to share, even if we're just a student, even if we're a newbie, even if we are someone who considers themselves in humble beginnings. So here we go. I just want to start off by just saying that yes, there is an explosion in interest in healing through plant medicine and psychedelics in North America, in the West, in Europe. In the USA, 21 million people already use psychedelics, and 64 million people are curious. Okay, so those are big numbers that are climbing. You've probably seen stuff in the media lately. And I think that the more information, the more wisdom, the more harm reduction, the more precautions that can be shared, the better through people who have had their own experiences. So I want to start off by saying I'm not making this video to recommend ayahuasca. I don't think it's a medicine for everybody. I think that if you are called to this medicine, you already know. You already have a magnetism in one way or another, or it wouldn't even be on your radar, or maybe it's just on your radar for the distant future. But I don't recommend it to everybody. I recommend it to those who feel intuitively called. And I don't not recommend it. This medicine is known for big duality, meaning you can hear stories of people who have had these life-changing, healing, heaven-like experiences through ayahuasca, and you can hear of terror and horror stories where people have seen way too many demonic entities and would never go back. And how could something have such a range? Well, that's because ayahuasca amplifies reality. It amplifies what already exists. So when we're in our physical third dimensional awareness, it is relatively concrete and compact. But when we go to a medicine like ayahuasca, it's very expansive. And so we can get to extremes and big spectrums depending on many factors. So everything that you do here is probably true about the healing and about the horror. And this is why I don't recommend it to everybody. And I approach it with a lot of caution and sacredness and reverence. So I come from a place where I approached ayahuasca the first time in 2018, wanting to close trauma loops, wanting to do inner child healing. This is a big reason people head towards ayahuasca in the West. However, it's important to know that in the big picture, that's not the only reason people are using ayahuasca. Okay, so down in the Amazon jungle, there are a lot of people who have used ayahuasca through many, many generations. Ayahuasca is a portal to the spirit world. It is a powerful spirit that opens us up to non-ordinary reality, and it works with our intentions. So people who do use it with intentions for healing, they tend to kind of go down that route with ayahuasca. But people who use it with intention to cause harm, curses, harm magic, that is a real thing, especially in the Amazon. There are people that approach it for so many different reasons. And ayahuasca, honestly, it works with intention. It works with intention. So instead of seeing it as something that only is there for healing or potentially there for healing, know that there is a really big range of intention that humans approach ayahuasca with. So yeah, it's a medicine. She's a medicine of heaven and horror and everything in between. And it's not because of the ayahuasca itself. It's because we are amplifying an intention. We're amplifying our own reality, and we're seeing what we're shown. And many people blame ayahuasca, but actually a lot of it has to do with the human mind and the human intention. So I'm going to tell you a few of my own heaven stories and my own horror stories throughout this, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't trade any of it for the world. So I am living experience that it is all real, and some of the experiences that I had even years ago, I'm still integrating. Ayahuasca works, and most plant medicines and anything that brings us into our subconscious works outside of time, works outside of linear time. So we can be shown something in a ceremony, and then years later it makes sense. Years later it comes to fruition in our everyday life. So that's something that we need to accept, that sometimes we go to a ceremony and things don't make sense till later. And that's part of our developing our relationship with a mystery. Developing our relationship with the mystery. So the first thing I would say about heaven, and I'm using that loosely, okay? I'm using that as like realms of expansion and realms of love and returning to self. So sometimes we have experiences in ayahuasca that are very profound and lead us eventually, maybe not in the ceremony itself, but lead us eventually to more of ourself, a home, a knowing ourself, which is kind of like part of our journey towards heaven. I'm going to tell you about a couple experiences that I had that were very vivid and very incredible, that are to do with inner child healing, because I do believe that inner child healing and closing trauma loops is something that when used with intention, ayahuasca can provide. So you might have heard a couple of these stories from me before, because I know I've shared them on a couple of videos or interviews. First one, I was in a ceremony, and I was re-experiencing something I re-experienced as a 3-year-old, with all the sensations and all the feelings that my 3-year-old didn't fully process. I was in a funeral home. I was with my grandma. She was at a funeral of her friend. It was an open casket. And in the ayahuasca ceremony, you can kind of move time as fast as you want. So if you kind of like focus on something in your vision, like an object, you can stay there as long as you want, and you can look at that object, and you can stay there for minutes if you want. So I was in this funeral home, and I first could see fake wood panel walls. It's 1980s. The shag carpet. There was a punch bowl, and egg salad sandwiches with the crusts cut off. I was viewing this funeral room that I was in when I was 3, and I couldn't believe all of this was stored in my subconscious. And there was all of these floral arrangements that were actually kind of creepy. Like, honestly, funeral floral arrangements back then, they weren't kind of like wild and blooming. I don't know. In my opinion, there's these kind of like dollar store ribbons around all these things, and it was a creepy scene. And I was pretty creeped out in the medicine. And my grandma was in this lineup where you would walk up to the casket with the open casket with the dead body, and kind of like view it and pay respects. And she was holding me, and she held me over top of this body. And my 3-year-old version, like, I blocked this out until I was in my 30s. Totally blocked it out. But as a 3-year-old, I was terrified. I was looking at this body that was pumped up full of formaldehyde and had like all this really cheesy makeup on, and I was experiencing, like, in my very wide open, highly sensitive 3-year-old beingness, the energies of death. And the scene changed. So it went from like a memory into kind of like one of these ego deaths that you hear about. I was unprepared for this. I didn't know about this. And I found myself in this vision, a separate vision, where I actually was locked in a coffin myself. I was locked in a coffin, and I could hear people talking about me outside the coffin. They were saying, it's too bad she died so young. She was a nice lady, or all this stuff. And I was on the inside of the coffin, and I couldn't move. In the vision, I was experiencing being trapped inside of a coffin, my body being stone cold, and yet my awareness was still fully peaked and awake. And I was trying to shout, "I'm in here, someone let me out." I'm awake. More about ego death. experiences in ayahuasca later in this video. But in the integration of this memory, it allowed me to see the beginning of my negative view and relationship with death itself. And it started in that funeral home, and that's why I was shown it. And it's been a beautiful integration, honestly. It sounds horrific, and it was at the time, but it was also very freeing to see the source and the beginning of my own fear of death. And then working closely in integration in the months and years after has kind of turned the tides and brought this huge healing and this release from that angst, and allowed me more of my own version of heaven in life. There was another one where I truly did have a tonsillectomy when I was 3. That really happened. And all I really remembered as an adult was having these popsicles after the fact. I don't remember anything else. But suddenly I'm in ayahuasca ceremony, and I am transported back in time to a hospital. I can see turquoise curtains and blankets. They're scratchy, they're uncomfortable blankets. I hear the nurse say, we're going to try and give her a needle, but if she's frightened, there's other things we can do. So a nurse tried to give me a needle for the anesthetic. I resisted and screamed. And the nurse told my parents that they could give me a gas mask. So they pushed me on a stretcher, totally conscious, to the operating room. They put a mask on me, and I remember there being a chemical taste in my mouth, and then a lack of feeling, a total lack of feeling, but still a lack of awareness. I could hear the medical personnel talking, and they were laughing and joking and super relaxed in a good way. And they were asking for different medical instruments to be handed back and forth between personnel. And then the operation was actually super short. There was a vibration in the ayahuasca ceremony. There was a vibration in my throat, like not pain, just a vibration. And I heard someone say cauterize. And then very quickly, I was wheeled out to a receiving room or a waiting room where you wake up from anesthetic. And when I woke up, my parents weren't there. And I must have woken up earlier than they expected. But my own reaction as a young child was that of terror and fear, because my body wasn't feeling like normal and my parents weren't there. And it was my first memory of anxiety. So this memory that was given back to me through the ayahuasca ceremony, because my intention was for inner child healing, allowed me to do some integration in the aftermath of understanding fears of being alone, fears of having anxiety, this kind of thing. So I could tell you many stories. And these are not celestial realm stories or heavenly stories, but what they were doing, these experiences in the ceremonies, were clearing the way so that I didn't have these long-term blockages of specific fears, phobias, and panic. And this is how the medicine works. It works with our intentions. There are horror stories, though. Not all ceremonial, like the ceremonies that I went to were in a really well, properly held and guided and protected shamanic space. I was very fortunate to be introduced to people who know how to provide that up in Canada. And later on, I naively thought that people who serve ayahuasca and do ceremonies must have the same reverence and care and safety in their ceremonies, and I would find out that that is not the case. Some people just do it for money, or some people are just negligent. They might not have bad intentions, but they're negligent. So I'll tell you another one that's more on the horror side, that was really difficult to recover from and integrate from, yet I wouldn't trade it for the world. I went to a ceremony with some other people I didn't know very well, and I got a really strange vibe off the facilitator. It was a woman in her, I don't know, 50s or 60s. Everyone was really friendly and welcoming. She had a really weird vibe, and I kind of chalked it up to my own nervousness or my own judgmental nature and thought, you're just overly thinking this. She's probably fine, blah, blah, blah. Before the ceremony, there was a lot of socializing. I was chit-chatting with a gardener that worked on the property. I didn't think anything of it. And we went into the ceremony, and I spent half the ceremony feeling like she was sending negative energetic darts at me. I felt like she was she was just focusing in on me with evil intent, and it was so difficult. And again, like in the ceremony and after, I really blamed myself. And I thought there was something wrong with me, or I wasn't elevating myself and uplifting myself properly. I was just really hard on myself. And after the ceremony, a few weeks later, I was talking to another participant that goes there all the time, who asked me how I got on with the facilitator. And I was honest. I just said it was a little bit of an odd connection. And he said, she doesn't like new people, especially women. She's got something going on with the gardener. I noticed you were, chit-chatting a lot. The gardener was chit-chatting a lot with you. And so I was kind of like concerned about you, kind of thing. And so looking back, I kind of was in the wrong place at the wrong time to learn a few lessons. Another thing that happened at that ceremony was that I didn't know this, but ceremonies are the facilitators are supposed to seal your crown chakra. They're supposed to close the portal above your head. When we go into ceremony, we're wide open to the spirit world, and usually it's safe in a protected space, but we need to have that closed properly afterwards, right? And they didn't do that at this ceremony. I didn't understand what was wrong with me. I was having nightmares. I was having the most horrific, horrific dreams and astral experiences for months. Again, I was blaming myself. What have I done wrong? What's going wrong here? The nerves on the top of my head were freezing cold. And I finally found somebody who knew what was going on and helped me close my crown chakra. But it still actually took a couple months of processing out all that negative energy I'd picked up in those months. So there are ceremonialists who, for whatever reason, do not have the sacred perspective of guarding the space. They don't prioritize it in a way that they should, especially for new people. So there are many, many other stories that I could tell you, but in general, there is a lot of healing that is possible, and there's a lot of horror that's possible. And so when we approach this medicine, we need to approach in a really a place from harm reduction, from a place of harm reduction, from a place of care, caution, patience, as far as choosing where you're going to go. There's a lot of that I want to talk about in this video. Okay, so intentions. Number one. Intentions. Know your why. Why are you going to this ceremony? Be honest. Are you going because you're curious about the cosmos and you're looking for universal wisdom? That's one reason many people go. And that is their prerogative. I have only really gone for healing intentions. So I'm only speaking from a place of that. Intentions are sometimes managed the opposite of what we expect. So we can set an intention like, show me love, show me how to love myself. And we can go through a ceremony that's like an experience of hell. And it's like, what happened to my intention, right? Well, what happens is ayahuasca brings us to a mirror realm. We go into often the fourth dimension, either the lower or the higher, or a bit of both. And we are shown, for example, all the ways that we are not loving ourselves. And that can be one of the most difficult ceremonies because we were already struggling. We went in and then we had a ceremony from hell, And so that's why this isn't for the faint of heart and why it's not for everyone. But our intentions are managed often the opposite of what we expect. And spirit does not accept the demands of a small ego. This is something taught by Kat Courtney. We can make all the intentions that we want, and we will be served with the answer to those intentions, but it might look very, very different. Look very, very different. So number one, I wish I knew before going to ayahuasca that it's not as straightforward with the intentions, although the intentions do get answered. Next up, number two, post-ceremony condition. A lot of people go to ceremony and they do not create space after ceremony to be still and to be silent, to be away from work, to be away from the city. They don't really take that part seriously. And that is fine, but if you are highly sensitive, you will really regret not carving out some space and time in nature, in silence for yourself after the ceremony, because even though the portal is closed in a good ceremony with a good ceremonialist, even though the portal is closed, we still are processing the medicine. It's still kind of moving through our body. We're still more wide open than normal, sometimes for weeks. So wherever you put your body, you're going to be like a sponge for whatever energies happen to be there. And if you can get yourself in nature and be off of work for a little while, you're going to be sponging up nature, and you're going to be sponging up support that's going to support you to integrate and for you to understand how your intentions were answered. If you're in a city and you're back at work, it can really negate a lot of the positive effects of the medicine, because the medicine doesn't just work in the ceremony, the medicine works afterwards too. And so make sure you're ready to commit yourself to not only the time of the ceremonies or the retreat, but plenty of time after. Number 3, titration as far as dosing. Titration as far as dosing. We'll get into this a little bit more when we're talking about vetting out a facilitator, because I believe a facilitator should be able to be flexible with you as far as the dose is concerned, but especially for highly sensitive people. Starting with a very small dose or even a microdose is really important in order to avoid overblowing your circuits. In Amazonian shamanism, specifically the Shipibo Kanibo tradition, which is the tradition that I've drank a lot of medicine with, there is a bit of a emphasis on like drinking a lot of medicine, like let's go in, let's do this kind of thing. But the highly sensitive person from the West, their body, their subtle body, their consciousness is a little bit different. And a lot of us have learned the hard way that that's not the best approach for people like us. So when I say titration, I mean skipping from A to D instead of A, B, C, D. This is, again, a lot of this information is from Kat Courtney, amazing teacher on ayahuasca. I'm only kind of sharing from her work, what has been really relevant for me. Anyway, so drinking, like never drinking ayahuasca before and then drinking this huge dose of ayahuasca, right? That might be okay, but it might not. And you need to check in with yourself. You need to know yourself. You need to know your intuition. And so there are people who have gone into their first ceremony and not drank anything at all. They've just meditated in ceremony and practiced their center. Okay, I think this is beautiful. I wish I knew that that was something that people could do, or that people did do back at the beginning of this for me. Anyways, or microdose, like small sips of it if you're sensitive. And this also helps us build trust with the medicine. So if you drink a huge cup of medicine and you're just totally blasted and you have no way of grounding yourself and it's new for you, you might leave and be really terrified of the medicine and blame the medicine for a negative experience. Instead of going about it that way, why not go in with really small doses from the beginning? And this is a really great answer and option for highly sensitive people that I really think, should be talked about and considered more. Next up, it won't heal you or fix you. There's a lot of talk about how ayahuasca will heal you or ayahuasca will fix you, how it's a shortcut, how it's like a magic pill where you can go on a retreat and come home and you're all good. And I think this is a big fat lie. And I think that this happens sometimes to some people on some occasions, but it's not the regular common occurrence. Let's put it that way. It will make you more conscious. So it might not heal you and might not fix you, but it's going to make you very conscious of the source of your troubles. It's going to show you and make you aware of why you feel the way you do, what started it, what memories, what thing in the past, so that you can work with that. There are a lot of people who make videos on YouTube. I've seen how they're like, I went to ayahuasca and I saw a bunch of demons. I went there for healing and it was like hell and I was faced with demons and it's like the underworld and now I'm saved and I found Jesus Christ. Okay, great. Sometimes those kind of people go in with expectations of being healed or expectations of things getting better for them immediately after going home. But we need to be prepared that we're going to see things that we don't normally see. All around us in the spiritual world, there are spiritual forces. There are angels, there are demons, there are elementals, the spirits of animals and plants. There's everything. And not everyone is prepared to see that. Ayahuasca does not bring those things to you. It does not try and force those things on you. What it does is shows you what is already in your field. And not everybody is ready to see those things. Not everybody is ready to learn how to protect from the malevolent forces that they encounter in the astral realm, and that is okay. But those people probably shouldn't be drinking any medicine, because the medicine is not going to heal you and fix you and patch you up and make everything beautiful and bring you enlightenment. Maybe, but probably not. It's probably going to show you all of the things that are leading to your suffering. And entities that you see in the field around you might be part of that. Okay, so having expectations that are realistic, that we can't predict what's going to happen other than we're going to have our reality amplified. Next up, number 5, the medicine heals in order of priority. The medicine heals in order of priority. So even if we set an intention, we might have an experience that seems to have nothing to do with our intention. Okay, so that can be confusing. What's going on here? Did the medicine not hear me when I set my intention? Your intention was heard. Your intention was heard in the astral. However, sometimes in order for our intention to be kind of mirrored back and given to us, for the teaching or the healing to take place, there are things in the way. So how the medicine works is it might find things that are in the way of you merging with your intention and understanding what you need to understand. It might find the blockages, and you might spend 1, 2, 3 or more ceremonies dealing with those blockages that are in the way. And you're wondering, like, why is it not answering my intention? Well, it's trying to. It's trying to cut through all the crap that's in the middle. So that's a very common and real thing that people need to be prepared for, and not be hard on themselves if they can't figure out why their intention was not answered. It's probably because the medicine was trying to clean up what was in between you and your intention in the blockages that exist in your system. Number 6, what's coming is going. This is true for a lot of healing work. Sometimes things come up that are really dark and disgusting. Sometimes things come up that we would rather not see. Sometimes we're very confused by these things. One of the ceremonies I went to, one of the teachings beforehand was, if you have a lot of talking in your head, a lot of like blah, 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 or like inner critic or incessant inner chatter, intrusive thoughts, to not despair, but to celebrate that what's coming is going. So it's like a purging. Sometimes when we have these incessant thoughts, if we are able to hold our center and view it from a higher perspective, anything that's really challenging that we're having to pass through, usually it's on its way out. It's on its way out, so we're witnessing it, or we're feeling it, or we're perceiving it through one of our senses, one or more of our senses as it's going. And so if difficult things are coming up over and over for you in ayahuasca or any other plant medicine work, usually it's a purge, and what's coming is going. Number 7, take your time interviewing facilitators. This is huge. Like, if I could highlight one of these points, I would highlight this one. So there are people who have like drank a lot of ayahuasca and then decided to run ceremonies. They're out there. There's a lot of them out there. And this is dangerous because they only have the limited experience from their own ceremonies. They only have the limited experience of their own ceremonies. The effective ceremonies, the safest and guarded ceremonies that I've sat in, the facilitator worked as an apprentice with shamans from the Amazon, where the medicine is grown, for over 12 years. Over 12 years, a massive time commitment, thousands of ceremonies, okay? And on top of that, which is a different topic, many diets, plant dietas, where you go into isolation, you follow a semi-fasting diet protocol, very bland, and you ingest a non-psychedelic plant, and you get to know through your altered state of consciousness the qualities and gain that plant spirit as an ally. For example, rose is one that works on the heart, so that when that facilitator is eventually holding a ceremony and someone needs specific heart center healing, they can sing and call in that plant spirit to the ayahuasca ceremony, specifically rose in this example, and there can be a real opening and warming and love implanted into the heart. And this is done by sacrifice, the sacrifice of the shaman in training, as they have sacrificed weeks or months of their life and sacrificed their diet and their connection with the outside world in order to gain this plant ally. We call this doctoring. And I believe that, especially if you're working with Amazonian shamanism, your shaman should have many diets behind them, not just experience with ayahuasca, many years apprenticing, and be signed off by the elders of that tradition, be endorsed by them to be pouring ayahuasca. So I would ask questions like, how many diets have you dieted if they're from the Amazonian tradition? I would ask how many years they apprenticed. I would ask, where's the medicine made? Who makes it? What ingredients are in it? Anything besides ayahuasca? Are you adding anything other than ayahuasca? Because people do that. If you're curious about this and you are preparing for a ceremony, you can get in touch with me through my website in the description, and I can send you a list of great questions to ask a potential retreat facilitator, so that you get the answers and you can feel really confident about who is pouring this medicine. Number 8, it can get worse before it gets better. I think it often does. After the ceremony, we can feel worse. We've had this rush of different chemicals in our body. We've had a very direct experience with spirit. We've had profound insights brought up from the subconscious to our awareness in the ceremony. And there can be a real kind of dip after the ceremony. People can feel really depressed. They can feel really disembodied. It's really common to not feel grounded, to feel like you're looking around at the world, and the world is the same for everybody else, but it's not the same for you. Kind of like you're still in limbo. And this is not normalized or talked about enough, but it's super common. Some people spend months like this. And so it can get worse before it gets better. And usually what we're being called to after ceremony is a lot of isolation, not jumping back into our social life, not jumping back into our commitments and routines, because it can take weeks and months to integrate the medicine, and it needs space. And if you're going to cover that up by busyness and trying to get back to your normal life, you're now fighting with the medicine that you probably paid hundreds or thousands of dollars to go and drink. So it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. There are things that we can do to ease that and integrate, but to expect that it's not going to be, rainbows and fairies after the ceremony. It's going to be probably some really hard work grounding back into your body and into your home and into your life. Number 9, resistance is one of the main causes of difficult ceremonies. So if you are somebody who is really well practiced in your own yoga routine or meditation routine or practice of letting go and allowing, if you've got a great connection with your breath, then ayahuasca is going to not be as difficult as it would be if you had none of those resources. So if you have none of those resources and you're not very capable of allowing and letting go in difficult situations in life, it's also going to be the same way in the medicine. Our natural resistance, which should not be criticized, it just exists, will come up because the medicine can make us uncomfortable. And the resistance on the participant side is usually the biggest cause of a difficult ceremony. There are many things that a ceremonialist, the assistants to the ceremonialist might be doing not safe or not supportive, and that's their responsibility. But on the responsibility of the participant, the number one thing would be understanding your relationship with resistance to things that happen in regular life, to difficult feelings, and then really working with that in the weeks or months before drinking the ayahuasca, and really having a way of confidently holding and supporting yourself during difficult situations in life. And if you've got that practice down, it's going to be a lot easier in ceremony. Number 10, outcomes will not be what you think. So this is back to like, the medicine is not going to fix me. We need to accept that. The medicine is not going to heal me. We need to accept that. Sometimes the outcomes are things like XXX doesn't own me. This issue, it might still exist in my life, but it's kind of a non-issue because it doesn't own me. It doesn't trigger me anymore. XXX has changed. So my codependency has changed. It's really not an issue. That's actually a real one for me. I was a very codependent person most of my life, didn't even know it. And the medicine really helped me stand in my own self so that I was no longer looking outside of myself for dependency in the same way, in an unhealthy way. My relationship to the mystery has changed, to not being able to have the answers that's okay. Relationship with death changes. Relationship with addiction changes. These are just some of the things that can change. It doesn't mean these things disappear, but they don't own us and they don't control us. And they're just kind of there, but they're resting and sleeping. They're not poking at us and making our life a living hell. Number 11, this is really important too. I wish I knew this before I drank ayahuasca. Have your integration helpers on call for afterwards. So we don't know if it's going to be a really deep dive that we will be left with like a lot of difficulty after the ceremony. So to make the most of the hard work that you did do in ceremony, it would make the most sense to set aside a bit of money and time to pay an integration coach or an integration therapist for some sessions to help make sense of things that are still really scattered, of images and symbols that you saw that troubled you and you haven't made sense of. And this is something that I started doing later in the game, but I wasn't doing this so much in the beginning, but it was invaluable. And looking back, I would have booked more sessions. Like I would have like really put a lot more of an investment into integration therapy, and it would have helped ease through the aftermath a lot quicker and brought a lot more understanding and normalization to what I was going through, and therefore helped bring me back down into my body faster. So those are my 11 things that I wish I knew before I drank ayahuasca. And continuing with many of the things I learned through teacher Kat Courtney at Plant Medicine People. I'm just going to move through a lot of these things. If you are someone who's considering drinking medicine, or you know somebody who is considering, maybe grab a pen and paper and jot down anything that pops out for you, because there's a lot here. Not everybody goes for sacred healing purposes. There are people who, you might be sitting in a ceremony beside somebody who's going because they want to gain power. Because they want to gain power. They want to learn how to manipulate other people. You just really never know why people are there. So to not go into it naively, it's not like those people are going to harm you in any ways, but just don't assume that everybody is there for the same reasons as you. Not everyone has noble intent. Can you accept the worst case scenario in order to understand your situation better? Uh, this isn't nice, like what if like everything you're afraid of happening and your life falls apart after, and you're no longer interested in the things you used to be interested in. They don't look like they're coming back into your realm of interest. You don't even feel like the same person. Like, can you accept that the worst case scenario could happen? And it's not happening to you, it's happening to your ego. If this does happen to you, then it's actually going to be a blessing in disguise years later. But at the time, it's going to feel like the worst case scenario. Sometimes, depending on what our soul wants, is the medicine can kind of clear out debris that we don't consider debris. So, if you have an attachment to like a certain hobby or a reputation or a career or a status of some sort, or a relationship, you might come out of that medicine and not be interested in those things, not find pleasure in those things, but also not find pleasure in anything else. Are you prepared for that? Eventually, what's going to happen is those things are going to be replaced by much better things, much more aligned and life-giving, purposeful things that you couldn't imagine were even coming your way. But at the time, it might feel like you're just kind of losing everything and you're in no man's land. And are you prepared for that? We must normalize our primal fears. Fear of death, fear of going crazy. These are primal fears. Ayahuasca is a primal medicine. It's an ancient medicine, and it's working with us on a very deep primal subconscious layer, and it can bring up our primal fears. So are you willing to learn how to sit with primal fears and still make it okay? Do you have the support and the resources for that? These are things you want to consider before you go. Fearful people should be very careful who they sit with. They should ask a lot of questions. So I think it's good if you have like a healthy fear around psychedelics. It just means that you want to be asking a ton of questions and spending a lot of time interviewing different facilitators and researching and vetting out different retreats, hopefully getting firsthand recommendations from people who have been on them. Fearful people should ask a lot of questions and not feel bad about that. When we ask questions, the fear dissipates. Sometimes this is something I love that Kat says. Sometimes we discover something doesn't really need to be healed like we thought it did. Something needs to be understood. This has been the case many times in my life, especially around the topic of anxiety and fear. Like, please take this away. Please heal this. Oh, ayahuasca, please help me with this, But sometimes it's like an unraveling of all of the reasons why we are holding something like fear or anxiety. And like I said at the beginning of the video about my tonsillectomy operation and the funeral, and like there is an unraveling sometimes of many, many different scenarios that have happened in our lives that explain why one pathology, so-called pathology, is bothering us. And until we can make peace with all kind of like the different angles of one thing, it's going to be with us. But there's so much rich wisdom and understanding within that. So, yeah, sometimes we discover something isn't really needing healing, but it's needing an expansion of consciousness. And at a certain point, it's going to not be such a big deal because we have so much more awareness around it. Sometimes pain doesn't go away. We want to be healed of our pain. Sometimes what happens instead is we grow in our ability to hold the pain. We grow in our strength. We grow in our container. Our container becomes much stronger. So even though pain might still come and go, it's kind of a non-issue because we're so strong in being able to hold it. Okay, so these are kinds of some ways the medicine works. If your pain didn't go away, it doesn't mean something went wrong. Ayahuasca loves symbols and images, and we must learn how to understand these symbols and images and not take them literally. So this kind of goes back to the fact that ayahuasca works outside of time. In my first ceremony, I was on Native Canadian land where a lot of natives used to live, ancestral land of Native Canadians. The, oh my goodness, I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, if I remember the name of this people group, I will mention it. They're worth mentioning. So in the ceremony, I could see a Native woman in a vision who had arrows, had a bag of arrows, a bow and arrow. She was a Native woman you could tell she was from that land. She was a land spirit, an ancestor spirit. And the feeling that was coming off of her as she looked at me, because she was a sentient being, she was a spirit, she was trying to mirror back a part of me. I didn't understand at the time why I saw this woman with the bow and arrows. She was very strong. She was very independent. She was very connected to nature. It was very soothing to see her. And years later, I would kind of do a deep dive into the goddesses, the Greek goddesses, and the archetypes, and how they can intermingle and affect our lives. And I learned about Artemis, and I know a lot of you guys know about Artemis, but in short, she is a female goddess of the hunt, and she protects young women and children. She is very connected to nature and her intuition, and she's where the wild things are, you know. And I didn't understand back then why I was seeing Artemis basically in the symbolism, in the cultural lens of the land I was drinking ayahuasca on. So I'm grateful for that now, because I understand that I was being shown that I have there's parts of me that have the strength of Artemis and the qualities of Artemis. I couldn't have known that at the time. So it actually was like 6 or 7 years later before I even integrated that part of the vision and appreciated it. So we're going to be shown symbols and images, some of which we will be able to interpret, and some that might take years to interpret because spirit works outside of time. All information we are given is good information, no matter what it is. We might not agree with that statement when things are tough, but eventually, if we keep on with our integration work after the fact, we will realize that any information we are given from spirit in our subconscious, in a ceremony, there's a reason for it. What is integration? Why is it important? Why do I keep talking about integration? Integration is making an experience conscious so that we don't have to carry it around with us anymore. So when we have a difficult experience in life and it's brought up through ayahuasca for healing, it can be really traumatic to re-experience that. And that's why after the fact, working with an integration coach or therapist is so important, because we want to make it as conscious as possible. So the mind, we're kind of working with the mind when we're, and the awareness in ceremony when we're kind of re-experiencing these memories. So in after times when we're integrating, we want to bring it into the body. So if you see something difficult, it's going to help you a lot to try and draw it, even if you're not an artist. It's going to help a lot if you find a song that kind of is along the same vibe of that difficult memory and you dance to that song. There are so many ways to integrate, journaling, writing, all this stuff. But we have to bring it into the body, because the body is the one that is like holding the difficult memory. So we have the difficult memory. It kind of gets like hidden in the body, in the subconscious. We see and recapitulate that memory in ceremony. So it's back in our awareness, but then we've got to do something with it in the body to move the energy. Okay, and so integration and kind of having an integration plan before your ceremony. Okay, so when difficult stuff comes up, what is my go-to with my body? Like, how am I going to express this in movement or in art or in creation after the fact? Because we can get really stuck if we don't kind of move it through those things. We want to take it from the mind to the body, and then we want to be in a better space going forward so that we are no longer holding this within us. That's kind of the point of all this. That's why going to the ceremony alone and not doing the work after is not going to really help many people. Like, yeah, you can feel better after, but if you don't integrate it and you go to another ceremony years later, you might be shown the same stuff. I'm living proof of that. So, yeah. Integration is better felt than put to language. Just mentioned that. And there can be confusion in the integration. We don't always have all the answers right away. Sometimes it takes a lot of exploration. But we need to celebrate confusion because we've been uplifted beyond the mind. So the mind is confused. The mind is very confused by many of these things. But we want to celebrate the confusion because we've gone beyond the mind. We've gone somewhere where the mind couldn't go. So our spirit and maybe our body is starting to like really become illuminated with new things. And the mind is going, ba, 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 I don't get it, I don't understand, I'm scared or whatever. That's okay. The confusion is just the fact that you've gone beyond your mind. And you'll go beyond your mind many times. It does actually get easier. Ayahuasca will amplify an aspect of our life that's not being noticed or honored so that we're faced with it in a dynamic way. So sometimes we get shown things in ceremony that had nothing to do with our intention, and we don't know why we were being shown. But the truth is we're being shown because it wanted to amplify something in our life that we are not facing. We might see it in graphic form or through graphic emotion, where we now can no longer look away. It's like, I can't unsee or unfeel that after the ceremony. I've got to deal with it. This happens a lot where people end up leaving long-term relationships or marriages or jobs or things where, yeah, maybe it was like tolerable, but then after the ayahuasca ceremony, it's no longer tolerable because the volume was turned up on just how this was affecting us. And it's so uncomfortable that we have no choice but to step away from it. And we ultimately, with integration, we go from a place of don't take me there, don't show me that, to a place where we're like, empower me so that I can see that. Huge difference, right? I wish I knew that before drinking ayahuasca, because I was that person who was like, oh, show me a bit, but don't show me everything. And when I should have been saying, help me feel as empowered as possible so I can see whatever it is you choose to show me. Ego death can happen. So it can show up in many different ways. You know, I talked about my experience being locked inside that coffin, where I was witnessing my ego like trying to like get out of the coffin and yell at people that I was okay and get out, but the truth was it was impossible. The ego had no power in that situation. It can feel like you're falling to a million pieces with no way to kind of put yourself back together. It's a great opportunity for breakthrough, and it's an exploration of life and death. And typically there's a big fight with the body and mind. Ego death, you know, can happen outside of plant medicine ceremony, of course. You know, I talk to people all the time who are going through incredible transformations and they're experiencing ego deaths of some sort. They are notorious when we're having like those incessant thoughts where the ego is just screaming and like trying to tell us to not move ahead, you know, to try and keep us small and just incessantly chattering at us. That's the ego like really like feeling like it's getting squeezed and extinguished. So understanding that ego death can happen in ayahuasca, it can happen outside of ayahuasca, and understanding that this is, again, where your spirit is trying to go beyond the mind and the mind is rebelling. You are up against millions of years of biology here. So those of us who know what this is, we are up against millions of years of biology. It's something we should be in awe and wonder. And we should celebrate the resistance the body is putting up. You know, don't feel bad about that. Just be a witness to it. Be a witness. This is what the body does. This is what it's supposed to do. It must be working properly. And yet I am not the body. I am the witness of this whole show going down. And wow, how awesome to witness the mind and the body rebelling against this awakening that is happening. Incredible. Because the ego does not go through the eye of the needle. The ego does not go through the narrow gate that Jesus Christ was talking about. You know, we can't take it with us. You know, we can't take our our filtered, our Facebook filter, our big fancy following. We can't take our perfect status in the community. We can't take our money. Can't take our image of perfection. That stuff's not able to come with us. And so these medicines start to shake things up to remind us exactly of that. So an ego death with or without plant medicine is always something to celebrate. After ego death experiences, we can go back to regular life and try and forget what happened. Or we can know that anytime we need to, even though life goes back to normal, we can go back to unity consciousness in our heart. And that's why the difficult experiences of ego death, there's always something that happens like right after the ego death. Trying to remember how you felt after you realized that the ego could do nothing in the face of spirit. There's always like those moments after ego death where it's like, well, it's nice to know that I am not the ego, because, it got me nowhere in that situation, but here I am. We have the opportunity to go back to that awareness in our heart, even if it's not 24/7 in our meditation. Just a few more things. Harm reduction. If you're going into ceremony, follow the preparation guide. Do not deviate. There's a diet. There might be, if you're on medications, pharmaceuticals, there might be some that you need to stop taking. Don't deviate from the preparation plan you're given. It's never full harm elimination. Risky things can be benefits, but there are risks to this. Detach from the outcome. And how are you preparing for a messy aftermath? Because trauma and PTSD wounds can get unearthed and might need disinfecting, might need love and support. So consider microdoses or small doses, like really small and moving up and up and up throughout your ceremonies. That is a harm reduction approach. And be sure that you're putting in place integration coaching or integration therapy. I would suggest even a preparation session with a coach so that you can talk about your intentions. You can talk about the diet and the preparation. You can talk about things that you're frightened of or concerned about. I do preparation coaching. You can contact me through my website. I think it's really helpful to kind of put yourself in a really good headspace before you go in. And then be aware of facilitators that are not in integrity, So facilitators that act like know-it-alls or gurus that are more talking about themselves than are kind of focusing on you and what your needs are. Facilitators who have very little apprenticeship experience. Facilitators who don't know how to answer questions about portal closures. So how I talked about closing the ayahuasca portal in the crown chakra, if they can't explain exactly how they do that with confidence and with sureness, you don't want to go there. And then finally, reciprocity. Ayahuasca ingredients are endangered. Finding a foundation that replants and making donation to the foundation is a way of being in right relationship with the earth. And if you're not somebody who is called to ayahuasca, but you do feel called to plant medicine, you feel like there could be something in that for you and it's a genuine call, there are many alternatives, including microdosing with mushrooms, non-psychedelic plant dieta. You can contact me through my website to talk more about those things. I also recommend Plant Medicine People and Kat Courtney, best resource that I've found myself, and my own coaching again for ceremony preparation and for microdose integration support and planning. And yeah, I've also put a website in the description for it's a rating. You can look up different ayahuasca centers and they're all rated according to participants' reviews. So you can read people's reviews and It can help you if you're kind of just like going in cold and you don't have anyone to recommend a specific ceremony or center to you. You can see how these centers are rated compared to each other and choose something that's like really, really high in the ratings and with a lot of ratings. Any other questions? Yeah, contact me through my website. I love talking about this. This is only an hour, so there are so many things. And yeah, I hope that if this is a medicine that is for you, that you can approach it with patience and caution when it comes to going to the right place with the right facilitator, and then preparing mentally, physically in a slow, safe way so that when you get there, you're like, yeah, like I've done everything that I can to keep myself safe. I'm not afraid to ask questions. I'm not afraid to drink a microdose, to drink a small dose, to sit in a ceremony without drinking at all. I know that my safety and feeling grounded is the number one thing here as far as my healing. That's what I hope for you. And yeah, if you have any other comments as a experiencer or a student of ayahuasca that would be helpful for other people, I would love to hear them in the comments. And other than that, please journey well.